When major information drops, everyone pays attention for a moment. Then something else happens. A new headline, a new crisis, a new controversy, and slowly the story that once felt enormous gets pushed to the side. It doesn't get erased, not entirely forgotten. It just gets crowded, gets drowned out. So in this episode, we're laying out another card game combination and asking what story it tells, hypothetically, about what happens after public outrage peaks. Because sometimes the system doesn't fight exposure head on. Sometimes it just waits. So, we have the first spread, and in today's hypothetical combination, media blitz, bread and circuses, internet worm, and New World Order. Together, they create a narrative about attention, distraction, and the long-term management of public focus. This isn't about proving anything. It's about exploring symbolism. Because in the card game's logic, power doesn't always suppress information. Sometimes it simply outlasts it. Alright, so we have Media Blitz. This is the first card. In the game, this represents overwhelming coverage. Stories everywhere. Breaking news, panels, reactions. When a major scandal or document release happens, media attention spikes instantly. For a brief window, it feels like the entire world is focused on one topic. But Media Blitz has double edge, because constant coverage doesn't always open or deepen understanding. Sometimes it just saturates the audience. Information overload sets in. People stop following every detail. They wait for summaries, and once attention becomes exhausting, the public becomes easier to redirect. The blitz burns out. And then that leads us into our next card, bread and circuses. Okay, so this represents distraction through entertainment, sports, celebrity drama, viral moments, cultural spectacles. Historically, the phrase meant keeping populations calm and occupied with entertainment and comfort. So, the card game's symbolic logic here is that bread and circuses doesn't suppress serious issues. It competes with them. If attention is limited, then whatever captures it most effectively wins. And entertainment is powerful. It gives emotional relief. It gives escape. It gives people something easier to process than complicated investigations. So when major information releases happen, they don't just face denial. They face competition from everything else for fighting for public attention. So even with me, I watch a lot of, even when I'm not like deep diving in the files or looking up stuff about cloning or whatever, I'm still watching movies that have predictive programming, which is pretty much everything now. But we're going to get into the next card here. Internet worm. So we have our third card. This represents chaos in information networks, misinformation, disinformation, and half-truths. Conspiracy layering. When a large document release hits the internet, analysis spreads instantly. Some accurate, some speculative, some completely false. So what's the result? Clarity becomes harder to find. People argue over interpretations. Different narratives emerge. Communities split into competing theories. The original documents become just one piece of a massive information storm. And in that storm, certainty becomes rare. In the card game symbolic narrative, internet worm doesn't hide truth, it buries it under noise. And that's very typical with what we're seeing now, because we have, how many people have you heard talk about this person's guilty, they need to be impeached, to get them out of there, and then you have the opposite reaction where they're like, oh, well, that proof is not conclusive, that, blah, 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 and all these things, and then, so no matter what, even with everything right in front of our faces, it's never enough to unite us as one. It's constant separation because we're already emotionally invested in where we are. So, I mean, most of us anyway, you have to be able to see past the narratives and see humanity. See that something's not right, and if it takes a complete overhaul to fix it, then that's what needs to be done. But I digress. So, that brings us to our final card of this 4-card combination. Now, mind you, I have 2. There's 2 sets of 4. We're breaking them up so it's easier to keep track of. So, I'm bringing you to the end of the first set. New World Order. In the game, this card represents large, slow-moving systems, institutions, power structures, networks that outlast new cycles. The New World Order card doesn't act quickly. It doesn't need to, really. It just represents long-term stability of systems that are difficult to disrupt. So when public outrage spikes, systems absorb the pressure. When attention fades, they continue operating. The card isn't about control in a dramatic sense. It's about endurance. So structures that persist even when public focus shifts elsewhere, I mean, that's the end result. So when you look at the full combination, media blitz, bread and circuses, internet worm, and New World Order, this tells a story about a cycle. Massive attention, overload, distraction, fatigue. Then you have continuation. Not because people stop caring entirely, but because sustained outrage is hard to maintain indefinitely. The system doesn't need everyone to forget. It only needs attention to move on. Again, this is symbolic storytelling through cards, but it reflects a pattern many people feel that they've seen. That time and distraction can be as powerful as suppression. So this is why it connects to major disclosures. Whenever sensitive documents involving powerful networks enter public conversation, there's a surge of attention. For weeks, sometimes months, it dominates discussion. Then gradually, new headlines appear. New controversies emerge, public focus shifts. The original story doesn't vanish, it just becomes one story among many. And over time, only the most dedicated observers continue tracking it closely. This card combination reflects that feeling. Not proof, not prediction, just a symbolic map of how attention behaves in the modern world. Alright guys, I just want to take a quick break to share this with you. So W Energy, my new sponsor, sent me a care package. This is pure energy drink supplement. Contains coffee bean extract. It's jitterless. Flavor is retro sherbet. I'm so excited that I wanted to try it on camera for you guys. So check this out. Chainsaw Man cup. This was straight from Dubby, along with this awesome Dubby hat. And as you can see, be better, guys. Alright. Now, discount code Don't Drink That will be down below. Go to w.gg and get your energy supplement today. Only 150 milligrams of caffeine. Oh, that is delicious. Tastes just like the push pop when you were a kid. Alright, let's get back to the episode. This is what brings us to the awareness and public awakening. So, what happens when people stop arguing over the details and they start looking at patterns, not individual names, not isolated events, patterns. Because once people begin to notice how systems behave, how information moves, how attention shifts, how the powerful protect itself, something changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, awareness builds. So in this final episode of the series, we're laying out one last card combination and asking what story it tells about what happens when the public starts connecting the dots. Not as a conspiracy, wink wink, as a perception shift. So here's the last combination. So whistleblowers comes back into the picture. Independent media, masses, and then power structure. Together they form a narrative about awareness. Not revolution, not collapse, awareness. Because the most significant shift in any system isn't always structural. Sometimes it's perceptual. So, in this whistleblowers, so we've talked about this card before. But in the game, this represents insiders who release information, documents, testimony, evidence, allegations. So whistleblowers don't always bring down systems, but they change conversations. They introduce new data into public discourse. Sometimes their claims are verified. Sometimes contested, sometimes ignored, mostly ignored. But once information is released, it rarely disappears entirely. It continues to circulate, it gets archived, it gets analyzed. And in this day and age, it circulates through social media. And you'll see it end up in reaction videos on YouTube or something like that. But the narrative logic is that whistleblowers create cracks in otherwise closed systems. Not enough to collapse them, just enough to let the public see inside. Because ultimately we're powerless as a small group, and since it feels nearly impossible to unite the population entirely, it's hard to bring down a system like that. Into media or independent media, okay? This represents creators, journalists, and commentators outside of traditional institutions, podcasters, YouTubers, researchers, writers. Independent media doesn't always have the reach of major outlets, but it has persistence. Stories that disappear from mainstream cycles often continue living in independent spaces. Analysis continues, archives grow, discussions evolve. And in this game's symbolism, independent media acts as a memory bank. It keeps conversations alive long enough or long after the initial headlines fade. Because they're not always perfect. It's not always perfect, not always accurate, but persistently. So we have masses, our third card of this final set. This represents the public. Not a single opinion, not a unified group, a collective awareness that shifts over time. The masses card in the game is unpredictable, sometimes disengaged, sometimes it's reactive, sometimes deeply analytical. But when enough people start noticing patterns, conversations change. Not because everyone agrees, because enough people start asking similar questions, and when public curiosity reaches a certain threshold, it becomes difficult for topics to disappear completely. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing all this stuff unfold from a card game that came out in 1995. So just keep that in mind, okay? This is because these things are a pattern. So it would make sense that it's been happening for a while and it continues to cycle over and over and over again. So just saying. So this brings us to the final card. Power structure. This represents institutions, networks, and systems that hold influence. Governments, corporations, media organizations, elite networks. The power structure card isn't simply about coordination. It implies resilience. Systems are designed to maintain stability, to absorb shocks, to continue functioning even under scrutiny. But when awareness grows, power structures adapt. They respond. They adjust messaging. They evolve. Not because they collapse, but because they're built to endure. So let's put the final combination together. Let's look at the full spread. Whistleblowers, independent media, masses, and power structure tells a story about tension. Information emerges. Independent voices analyze it. The public becomes more aware. Power structures adapt. Not a sudden revolution, a slow shift in perception. because awareness doesn't always destroy systems, but it changes how people see them. And once perception changes, trust changes, engagement changes, expectations change. The system remains, but the relationship between system and public evolves. And this is why all this stuff matters, because when major document releases or scandals involving powerful figures enter public awareness, people expect immediate consequences. But real change, historically, tends to be slower. Awareness builds over the years, conversations evolve, cultural memory forms, and then the cards in this series don't prove anything. They simply reflect how people interact the behavior of systems. And in this final combination, the focus isn't on secrecy, it's on awareness. So, as far as card combinations go, this is the series conclusion. I have one more episode at some point about AI and how this could all connect. So over the last 3 episodes, we've looked at different card combinations and the symbolic stories they tell. Closed networks, information control, media influence, distraction, exposure, fatigue, awareness, not predictions, not accusations, narratives. Because sometimes the most revealing thing isn't any single piece of information. It's the pattern people believe they see when they step back and look at the whole picture. This card game was designed as a satire, but satire reflects fears, concerns, suspicions about how power operates. This series wasn't about proving any one theory, it was about exploring why certain patterns resonate with people, and why conversations about power keep resurfacing generation after generation. If there's one takeaway from this entire series, it's this: awareness doesn't always change systems overnight, but it changes how people interact with them. And once awareness spreads, it rarely goes back to zero. So, like I mentioned, we're going to wrap up everything with AI and how it could also be playing a role here. So, until next time, remember, the biggest shift isn't always what's happening behind closed doors, it's about what's happening when the public starts paying attention. I love you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so I can continue to make hard-hitting content like this for you guys. Because I've got ancient civilizations coming up. And in between all that, I've got my top 5 reviews on conspiracy-related video games, TV shows, and movies. So if you guys are interested, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, and until next time, I love you guys. Don't drink that. Stay safe. Peace.